So now that we've created our UITableViewController in our main.storyboard file, and we've created a file where we can actually write code on this UITableViewController, let's go through kind of this template code that was given to us when we created our CocoaTouch class file. Okay, so remember with those CocoaTouch class files, they allow us to create these Swift files that can be subclasses of superclasses that Apple has already created, right? So again, our TableViewController is a subclass of UITableViewController. So it's already provided us all of this awesome code that will help us configure our table view. Okay, so let's go through it together and clean out some of the stuff that maybe we aren't going to need. Okay, so we're going to be using this contact TableViewController file in order to provide data to our table view, right? So this is going to be the view controller that's managing all of the data. And we can see here that we have this mark table view data source. Okay, so this is the data source. This is where all of the data is going to come from. That's going to tell our table view how many rows it needs to have, what should each of the cells look like, what information should they have, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's in this viewDid load, let's go ahead and clear this commented code out because we don't need it. Now let's take a look at these table view data source methods. Okay, so we see we've got a function here that says number of sections. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to ask how many sections should your table view have. Now we're only going to be using one section, and so the default implementation, if I don't use this method at all, is going to return one section. Okay, so I can go ahead and clear this out, and our table view is only going to have one section. Now sections are used like in the Contacts app. You know, you have different sections where you have everyone's last name that starts with an A or a B or a C or a D, right? Those are going to be different sections. Well, our Contacts app is, again, just going to have one section. So we don't need to implement the number of sections method here. But this next one is a required method, okay? So I can't get away with any sort of default implementation on this. I need to tell my table view how many rows it needs to have, right? How many rows are in the section? Well, if we just have one section, it doesn't really matter what section we're talking about, but I do want to specify how many rows there are going to be. Okay, well, the number of rows in our table view is going to depend on how many contacts we have. So let's go ahead and create just a simple array of contacts that we can use as our data source. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to say let contact array here equal, and then let's go ahead and throw some contacts in. Okay, so we'll put Nelly in here. We'll say Andrew, Caleb, Alan, Rachel, Julia, Stephen, and Aaron. Okay, so we have this contact array, and we're going to say that this is going to be the data source for my contacts, right? And probably in a real application, we would maybe use like a dictionary that had their phone numbers associated with them or whatnot. But at least for this, we're just going to have a simple array. Okay, so now looking back at these table view data source methods, we want to know the table view controller wants to know how many rows should I create for your table view. Okay, well, we want that number to be dynamic based on our data source, which is our contact array. Okay, so instead of returning 0 here, we're going to return contact array dot count. Okay, so you can see that this count here is going to give us the number of elements in the collection. Okay, so I want my number of rows to be equal to however many contacts I have, which makes a lot of sense, right? So there's our first data source method, is the number of rows in section, and this one is required. Okay, so here we've got commented out a few others. Now this one is commented out, but it is required. This one is the cell for row at. And what this method is asking, or what it's saying, is what information should be on the cell. Okay, so let's go ahead and uncomment this. And let's take a look. So we've got this cell for row at index path. Okay, and then we're returning a UI table view cell. Okay, and they've already given us a cell, and we know that the cell is tableview.dq reusable cell. Now what this is saying is similar to what I was telling you when we were looking at our main.storyboard, is that in order for table views to be efficient, they are going to reuse cells, okay? So think of a table view on your app as like a treadmill, okay? So even though you could run on a treadmill for miles and miles and miles, right? You're still running on the same, I don't know, maybe 10 feet of that rubber mat. Well, it's similar with table views in that the table view may only have 8 to 10 different cells that are loaded at the same time, okay? And as a cell is scrolled off the screen, it is reused, it's given new information and reused and comes up from the bottom, right? So a table view is similar to a treadmill in that way. So this is saying, okay, so your cell that we're creating is going to be from a reusable cell with identifier. And then it says reuse identifier. So remember in our main.storyboard here, if I go to my contact cell, remember that we gave it a reuse identifier, right? Which I put right here. Okay, so we've given it an identifier, contact cell. So let's go ahead and in our table view controller, we want to reuse our contact cell. Okay, so that's going to be the primary cell that we're reusing for our table view. So next it's asking us to configure the cell, or what information should be put in the cell. Okay, well we want our contacts to be put into the cell. Well, how do we know which contact we want to put in? Well, if we look at one of our other arguments, we see that we are given an index path, which we can think of the index path as like the row number, okay? So using that subscript notation, we can actually create a contact and pass in the index path to get the correct name, and then we're going to put that name onto the cell. Now let me show you what I mean, okay? So we're going to configure the cell here. So we need each cell to have a contact. So let's go ahead and say let contact equal, and then we want to access our contact array, and we want to access the element at whatever index path or whatever row that we're at. Okay, so we're going to say index path dot row, which will give us the integer value of that index path. Okay, so our contact is going to be self.contactArray at our index path dot row. So what this is saying again is, well, if I'm at row 1, then I want my contact to be contact number 1. If I'm at row 2, contact 2, so on and so forth. Okay, so we've created a contact. So now that we've got a contact, we want to put that contact into our label. Okay, and so remember here in our main.storyboard, because we're using a built-in table view cell style, this basic, we're also given access to that label here without needing to create an outlet, okay? So if we go back to contact table view controller, we can say cell dot text label, okay? And you can see that it says returns the label used for the main textual content of the table cell, okay? Because we're using that basic type, I can access the text label without needing an outlet. Okay, so we'll say cell.textLabel.text is going to be equal to whatever our contact is. So we've got our contact here. Cell.textLabel.text is equal to our contact, and then we're going to return the cell. Okay, so now the table view knows how many rows it needs to have and what information should be displayed in each cell. Okay. So the rest of this code, let's go ahead and get rid of it. This is for supporting like editing your table view, if you wanted to move cells around or delete cells and whatnot, but we're not going to implement any of that. So delete the code down till you get to mark navigation, okay? Because we will be implementing that a little bit later. All right, so we're almost ready to run our app, but let's hop back over to our main.storyboard. And when we had our view controller scene here on the storyboard, it was already initialized as our initial view controller, okay? So whenever we have this main.storyboard file, we need to tell the app what storyboard it's supposed to begin with, right? What is it supposed to open up to? Now, when we created the single view app and we had the view controller here, that was already automatically set to the initial view controller. But because we've deleted that, the app doesn't know what storyboard or what view controller it's supposed to start out with. So we need to set our contact table view controller as our initial view controller. So go ahead and select your contact table view controller here. And in the attributes inspector, we're going to set this to is initial view controller. Okay, so we're telling the application when you launch, this is the initial view controller. This is where you should start. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the app and see how things are looking thus far. Okay, we'll give it a second to load. And we see that now we have a table view controller here that shows a list of each one of our contacts. Okay, so we've got Nellie up to Aaron. Perfect. So we're still not done though, because if I click on each of these, nothing happens, right? And so now we want to focus more on the navigation between the two. And that's what we're going to be talking about in our next lesson, is how to navigate from one pane to the other and pass that information through to the other screen.